Let's go. Ooh, feeling good. Okay. Hey friends, in this video, I'm going to talk about how to think about managing as a first-time manager. I'll be coming at this from the perspective of a software engineering manager, but most of these ideas apply to managing in any field. First off, you might be wondering, what does a manager actually do? Your manager probably assigns you work and they give you feedback from time to time, and you take a look at their calendar and it's probably full of meetings. It might be like regular weekly meetings or just like one-off meetings on specific projects, being worked on by the team. There's even companies that, tout having like a flat organization or not having any managers. So these are all questions that I asked myself in the past couple of years, and I have come across some answers that work for me, kind of having transitioned to becoming a manager in the last year. So this video is meant to go over what I wish I learned earlier as a manager and kind of high-level ways of thinking about managing that act as pretty good guidelines, in my opinion, on both people management and engineering management. One thing to note, and what you'll probably hear a lot, is that managing is really kind of a figure it out as you go type of experience. There's not really kind of one playbook that works, that you kind of get and study and learn and are able to kind of handle all the situations that come. It's very much that you're presented with a problem and you have to figure out the solution, or kind of ask your manager or mentor for advice on how to get through this situation, and then you move on to the next problem. And managing is really kind of just going through a lot of these problems and gaining the experience and learning how to solve whatever issues come up, and how to kind of prepare your team and yourself for how to handle these situations better in the future. So first off, for what a manager's responsibilities actually are, let's not reinvent the wheel. So Square makes their leveling framework for engineers and engineering managers public. So let's take a look at that and see what they have to say on what engineering managers should be doing. Most of what's in Square's framework is pretty common sense. So I'll just highlight some of the key points. All right, so we click into the Square thing. For team size, Square recommends a new manager to have a team of around 4 to 5 people. I think this makes sense. This is usually where, if you're already managing 4 to 5 people, the load of managing people and kind of managing the capacity of your team starts to take up the vast majority of your time. And so you don't really have much room to be contributing as an individual contributor. And so this is kind of when you have to become a full-time manager. So in terms of prioritization and execution, you'll be responsible for your team's output. So it's no longer kind of about your individual output, but more about how much your team is outputting and how efficient they are at finishing work. In terms of collaboration, you're also responsible for filtering communication between your own team and other teams or other PMs that you're working with. And this can actually play a big role in any larger projects or cross-team projects, where if the communication is really smooth between you as a manager and other teams or other stakeholders, then that can really speed up the progress on a project. And lastly, in terms of building and developing your team, you'll need to manage your team's growth and morale, as well as headcount. If you're interested in reading the full document, there's a link in the description below. So in this video, I'll be covering the technical aspects of engineering management, and I'll make a follow-up video on the people management aspect of things. Now on to technical management. Here we go. So one way that I like to look at managing a team in general is that you want your team to be this kind of adaptable, self-healing organism that can get stuff done, can take on challenges independently, and also handle any failures gracefully and learn from them. So for software engineering teams, that translates to managing your team's capacity and enabling them to take on more scope, develop features more quickly, and let them have some room to innovate. And you want to make sure everything is stable by supporting a 2-tier on-call rotation. Now, a lot of what I'm going to talk about here comes from this great book on systems of engineering management. It's called An Elegant Puzzle by Will Larson, who's currently the CTO at Calm, the meditation app. I'd highly recommend this book. It goes over these ideas really well and has a lot of situational tips for large-scale events like technical migrations or reorgs, or developing your team's vision and strategies. First off, team size. One reasonable target in the sky to have is to aim for a team of about 6 to 8 engineers. It's a reasonable number of people to manage, and it lets you set up a 2-tier on-call rotation. Now, I don't think this is super necessary to adhere to really strictly, but it's more of a good guideline to have, especially if you do need on-call. It's not too much of a load for 6 to 8 people to handle. It also gives your team a bit more redundancy. Your team can kind of handle a couple of people leaving without really breaking your team's back, versus if you had like 4 people, 2 people leaving would be pretty catastrophic potentially. Now, the most helpful thing I learned in the last year was from this book, and it's this mental model of how to manage your team's capacity. So this model has 4 states for a team, and it talks about how teams transition in between these 4 states. Now the first state here is falling behind. So this is when you have too much work that's coming in and not enough people to get all of the work done. So here the only scalable solution really is to add more people. And then once you do that and train them up, and once you kind of have enough capacity in terms of people to handle the workload, then you move on to the state of treading water. This is where you have enough people to handle the work coming in, but you're kind of just handling the amount that's coming in and there's not a lot of buffer room. Now the goal here is to get that buffer room, which will allow you to kind of optimize and take care of tech debt and allow your team to be able to develop features even more quickly, which will give you more room. And that kind of brings us to the next step of how to get that buffer room, which is by reducing your work in progress. So this means potentially taking on less projects and allowing your team to have some buffer in order to start moving to the third state, which is repaying debt. Now the goal of repaying debt here is to clean up your code and clean up any technical debt and eventually allow your team to be able to iterate and build new features more quickly, since there's less debt and less bugs to deal with. So from here, you want to take time to pare down debt and keep it low, since if you're building new features, that's just going to introduce more debt. So once your debt is low enough and your immediate work is being completed quickly, this lets you use that time now to start innovating. Here, you and your team can start thinking of new ways to add value that you didn't have the space to think about beforehand. From here, you want to add slack to your team's schedule so that you can still keep meeting your immediate needs and keeping debt low to avoid backtracking. One thing I'll add on to the section of repaying debt is not just limited to code debt. So as your team grows, it's going to be natural that there'll start being inefficiencies in how things get done and the speed at which things get done. And some of the solutions to those inefficiencies might actually come in the form of processes or adding documentation and things like that. So this is another area where you really just need to kind of figure it out as you go and just keep an eye out for any things that are slowing down your team's ability to get things done. So that's it for the technical management side of things. I'll be making a follow-up video as well with how to think about the people management side of things. So keep an eye out for that. Cheers.